Welcome back to English for Philosophy Students, third lecture. Today we are going to spend a little bit of time answering your questions, just a couple of your questions, and I have a timer set so I don't go past 4:30 on questions. Then we're going to get right to the book, and we'll spend most of the time today working with the book. Okay? But first, a couple of your questions, just a few, one or two. Okay, somebody asked about the phrase, "that is." It's in the end of the first paragraph. Levis says, this is in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line from the bottom of the first paragraph on the first page. Levis says, "I didn't, that is, like the implication it had come to inhere in the formula that practical criticism was a specialized kind of gymnastic skill to be cultivated and practiced as something apart." This student said that this phrase was unclear. I'm going to write it on the board. I didn't, that is, like the implication, right? Like the implication. Okay, if you remember correctly, Levis is telling us that he had given up the phrase practical criticism in favor of the phrase judgment and analysis. He didn't tell us why he didn't like the phrase practical criticism. He only told us he preferred judgment and analysis. Then, at the end of the paragraph, he begins this sentence: "I didn't, that is, like the implication that had come to inhere in the formula." The phrase, "that is," a student asked, why does he have that phrase in there? Why didn't he just say, "I didn't like the implication"? Now, he could have just said, "I didn't like the implication." That is not necessary. But it means the same as in English. Sometimes we use the symbol IE, which simply means here comes more information and more specific information. This indicates that the information given in this sentence relates back to information given before, but this one makes it more specific. So, I didn't like, you could have said, he could have said this. He could have said, "I didn't like certain implications," i.e., the implication that practical criticism is a gymnastic skill. And it would have been the same. That is means in addition to what I have said before. Okay? And that is a good question. It was hard for me to figure out how to explain this, because as a native speaker, I understood this phrase, but it wasn't in any of my grammar books. None of them. I searched to find out what it was, and the only way I was able to find it was in a string of examples of its use. So it is not a clear grammatical point. It is something native speakers throw in to mean more specifically something. Okay. Good question. Okay, let's see. Oh, another student asked about a particular word that I used. I said something to the effect of, I said, meanwhile, I'll tell you what Olavo says and what I have gleaned and what Alessandro has gleaned from about 5 readings of the same text. And the student was asking about the word gleaned. Now, the student thought it sounded like I was saying this word. Now, in English, we would pronounce this word glint. Glint. And it means, as the student correctly said, it means a small, bright flash of light. So a sparkle of light. Glint. The glint in someone's eye is the flash of light in their eye. But the word I used was not glint, it was gleaned. Gleaned. First, I want to point out that the student thought I said glint because gleaned has ed at the end, and in some pronunciations it sounds like t. So when you pronounce past tense, sometimes you will have to say the t sound instead of ed. So we do not say gleaned, we say gleaned. And the word glean means to capture the last bits, or to take the most you can get from something. So if you glean in the fields, you are getting the end of the grain. You're getting a small amount through hard work. And when I said Alessandro and I gleaned information from this book, it was implying that we did not get the whole harvest. We did not get everything. We got a little bit after the main amount was to the side, and we were able only to get a little bit. So glean implies only a little bit. Were we able to extract from the book? So it was a measure of how difficult the reading was that we, Alessandro and myself, had to read it many times. And still we only gleaned a little bit of understanding. So, good question. And we have one more question. I would like to give a slightly longer answer to this last question, but I have a timer set, so I won't go over. I will read you the question. It is written in very good English. This student writes very well. Okay, I'll read this to you. Last class, answering the question concerning homeschooling, Margarita advised us not to let our children watch TV. However, a Brazilian psychiatrist who works with education wrote a book advocating the use of TV, saying that TV has been doing a good job in teaching and promoting the development of children if we consider the failures of the school system. Now, I have a child, and my wife and I usually let him watch kids' shows such as those from Discovery Kids and Baby TV, and cartoon DVDs such as Sesame Street. We do this without forgetting to instill in him a taste for reading and hearing stories. So, I would like to know whether Margarita really considers that TV is absolutely condemnable from an educational point of view. If yes, why? Or does she think that we can benefit from it and use it as a supplementary resource and an ally, as in the examples mentioned above? Well, I will give you my true opinion, but I am not a psychiatrist. I am just a homeschool mother, and I know other homeschool families that have gotten rid of their TV, have no TV in the house. And we have had no TV in the house for 25 years. And my children have grown up with no TV in the house. They do see TV at friends' houses or at Grandma and Grandpa. So I'll give you my opinion. For me, I have to say, if you knew my children, you would think they were unusual. Everybody thinks these children are unusual, and they cannot understand why. I believe the single greatest reason that my children are unusual is because they have not had TV, and everybody else in America has TV. This is my conviction. I believe this. I will give you one story that will illustrate my point. My children were young, maybe age 6, 4, 2, and baby, maybe. Or 7 and 5, around the age. The oldest was about 6 or 7. And it was Christmas time. And in America, Christmas is all about presents. It's about toys. And everybody wants lots and lots of toys. And there are new toys out there, and people literally stampede and kill each other to get these toys for their children. And in our neighborhood, a Santa Claus came by to visit our children and to ask the children what they wanted for Christmas. So the man came to our door and knocked, and came in a red hat and a Santa Claus suit, and he spoke to the children, and they were so excited. And he asked them, "What do you want for Christmas?" And the children said, "Come see, come see what we are going to give to our parents for Christmas and to our friends for Christmas. And they took him and showed him the presents they had prepared to give. Then he asked again. He said, "This is good, but what can I bring to you for Christmas?" And they said, "Come with us. We will show you what we are giving to Jesus for Christmas." And they showed him little beads that they are earning, good deed beads. Let me write that down. Good deed beads. Each time the child did a good deed for their brother or sister or anyone, they took one bead and put it in a box. And on Christmas Eve, they had a box of good deeds to wrap up and put on under the tree for baby Jesus. So they showed this to Santa Claus, and he said, "Very good, but what can I bring you? What do you want me to bring you for Christmas?" And the children, for the first time that night, were silent. They had nothing to say. And then the oldest said, "But we already have everything." And then the second child said, "Maybe some candy." And then the children started jumping up and down. "Yes, yes, candy. Bring us some candy." And the Santa Claus looked over the children's heads at me and said, "These are very unusual children." Because he had gone to every house in our neighborhood already, and he had never met a child who, A, thought they had everything, which, by the way, they didn't have almost anything. They had very few toys, almost nothing. But A, thought they had everything, and B, didn't want anything. They didn't know about all of the toys that produce greed in children who watch commercials. On TV in the fall, we have commercials for Christmas. And that's where the children develop greed for toys. So that is one example of why I think it's good not to have TV. But there are others, and I am worried that I'm running out of time. We're going to do a whole class on homeschooling. But I will tell you, and if anybody wants to ask more about this topic, ask this week over email, and I will speak more next week. But I will just tell you that television and screen-based entertainment, like video games, are addictive. It is an addictive medium, and it operates on the brain like a drug. And that is why parents abuse it and put their children there for hours so that the parent can get something done. But it depresses the intelligence of the child, and it reduces their creativity and their imagination. It is harmful. I would say if it is to be used as an ally, it should be only in strict moderation, maybe one show a week or one show a day at most, if you are watching with your child. And it is a social activity with excellent content that you then talk to your child about and play with him about it. Interact. But aside from that, TV is not your ally, in my opinion. But I'll say more if you ask me more questions. I had many notes, but I'm out of time for questions. So let us go to the book. All right. Now, we finished the first page, but I would like to reread the first page in order to get a running start on the continuation of the argument. Just listen. Don't worry if you don't understand everything. Get used to hearing English at full speed. And let the ideas light up in your mind freely, but don't worry too much if you miss a lot. And if you want to ask a question, do it on chat or in email. Okay? I'm going to read through 2 paragraphs that we already studied and then continue into the third. And then we will go sentence by sentence in the third paragraph. Okay? Let me know if I need to slow down for you. Chapter 1, Thought, Language, and Objectivity. This is not the book I have been often reproached with having promised a quarter of a century ago and never having produced. Judgment and Analysis was the heading I put over some of the intended contents when they were printed in Scrutiny. I had coined the phrase as a substitute for practical criticism. Practical criticism, I used to tell my lecture audiences and the undergraduates who worked with me at my college, is criticism in practice. And we are engaged in that when, for instance, we decide that a novel is good and give our grounds for the judgment and put the case with care, or when we inquire into the justice or otherwise of Eliot's conclusion, Hamlet being in question, that the play is most certainly an artistic failure. I didn't, that is, like the implication it had come to inhere in the formula, that practical criticism was a specialized kind of gymnastic skill to be cultivated and practiced as something apart. The influence of that idea, I thought, was to be seen in Tilliard's odd and ominous tribute to 7 types of ambiguity, poetry direct and oblique.
Margarita, I've got a question about this paragraph.
Okay.
Why is it so bad that practical criticism implied that it was a specialized kind of gymnastic skill to be cultivated and practiced as something apart? Why should we not cultivate it as something apart? And, of course, why does he precisely mean by apart? That is, apart of what?
Okay, we've had a question. Why is it so bad that practical criticism should be a specialized kind of skill to be cultivated and practiced as something apart? Shouldn't we cultivate it and practice it? Okay, the answer is Levis is concerned that Tilliard and others like him are making practical criticism to be something that is only practiced by an expert, only practiced by a specialist. Tilliard is making practical criticism into an esoteric skill. Is the word esoteric Latin? Good. Esoteric. An esoteric skill that is only for persons with a PhD in literature. Levis feels that practical criticism is a skill which must be cultivated by all serious students in all fields. Even the student who wants to study mathematics or science or economics or political theory must cultivate practical criticism of literature. Practical criticism is not for the elite academic English student. It is for all serious students. So, in answer to your question, it is bad for it to be specialized to only a few, but it is something which should be cultivated as a skill, and even as a skill apart, in the sense that we must focus on cultivating the ability to appreciate and criticize fine literature. We must focus on that skill and not simply assume that a student will be able to do it if he is simply exposed to literature. So, yes, we need to focus on developing this skill. We need to practice. But no, it is not just for professional writers and academics. Okay?
There's one more here.
Another question.
Okay. If practical criticism is what, quote, we are engaged in when, for instance, we decide that a novel is good, give our grounds for the judgment, and put the case with care, could we not say that everyone who has read a literary work and formed an opinion about it is to some extent practicing criticism, even if unwittingly?
Yes. Oh, sorry, I bet you didn't hear that. The question was, if practical criticism is what we are engaged in when we decide that a novel is good, give our grounds for the judgment, and put the case with care, is it not true that anyone who has read a novel and given his opinion of it is engaged at some level in practical criticism? And the answer is yes. If a person reads a novel, forms an opinion, and expresses that opinion, at some level he is engaging in practical criticism. If he gives the opinion carefully, and he gives good reasons to support his opinion, and he brings in connections to other literature, perhaps more ancient literature, as well as contemporary, then he is engaging in practical criticism at a higher level. So practical criticism is simply reading critically. And the more you bring in to your knowledge base for comparing the work you're reading, the better. And the more care you take with forming your opinion and expressing it, the better. But yes, at some level, just forming an opinion and expressing it is practical criticism. Okay, second paragraph. In any case, I knew that tests of perception and sensibility and exercises in judgment and analysis should be, and should deserve to be, thought of as fostering the kind of intelligence in the training of which a university English school that deserved to exist and be respected would see the work of its justifying discipline. That's how far we got last week. Now we will move on, unless you have a question. Now I want to point out that in the sentence I just read, he is talking about practical criticism, fostering, which means nurture and develop, a kind of intelligence which should be developed by every English school. So we will move on now. Paragraph 3. Of course, as this last sentence shows, I raised for myself with that conclusion and recognized that I was raising problems of thought as well as of practice. English is at the other extreme from mathematics. Okay, I think I may stop right there and we'll talk about that sentence. Make sure we understand that sentence. Okay. At the core of that sentence is the idea that in the previous paragraph, Levis raised two problems for himself, one of practice and one of thought. Okay, the sentence in question was the sentence in paragraph 2, where he was talking about fostering a certain kind of intelligence. And he said this raises problems of thought and practice. The question is, if you want to foster a certain kind of intelligence, how will you do that? That is a practical question. How, in practice, are we to foster a certain kind of intelligence? This is the practical problem. The second problem is one of thought. We are trying to foster a certain kind of intelligence. What kind? What kind? What kind of intelligence are we trying to foster? How can that intelligence be defined? That is the meaning of this sentence. So,
Margarita,
yes.
Could you explain the meaning of the verb to foster?
Yes, to foster.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I forget to repeat the question. The student asks for a definition of the verb to foster. Foster. To foster means to develop or to grow or to provide an environment in which something will grow. We talk in English about foster parents. Foster parents. If a child has no home, he will be placed in foster care, where they can help him to grow. They are not his parents, but they will raise him. So we are trying to raise and develop and encourage a kind of intelligence. And this raises two problems, one of practice, how can we do it, and one of thought, what kind of intelligence? Okay, moving on. The end of this sentence says, English is at the other extreme from mathematics. So he will speak later as to how it is different from mathematics. So let us move on to the next page. I will read. One can more readily talk in a descriptive and definitive way of the kind of intelligence than begin to define the discipline. I'll read that sentence again. One can more readily talk in a descriptive and definitive way of the kind of intelligence than begin to define the discipline. Okay, he is saying that it is easier to answer this question. What kind of intelligence? Rather than to explain what discipline or what teaching technique will foster this intelligence. So what discipline? Okay, so he is saying it is easier to talk in a descriptive and definitive. Descriptive, describe. Descriptive, describe. Definitive, define. Okay, these are the roots of the words descriptive and definitive. So he says it is easier to describe the kind of intelligence and to define the kind of intelligence than it is to describe and define the pedagogical process, the discipline, the way we will teach to get this. To describe means to tell what something is like, what the characteristics are. To define means to tell what it is comprehensively. They are slightly different. So these words are not redundant. They mean something different.
Margarita?
Yes.
In this sentence, one can more readily talk in a descriptive and definitive way. What does one mean? Right? And how can we understand readily? In this sentence, one can more readily talk.
Okay. The question is, in the sentence, one can more readily talk in a descriptive and definitive way of the kind of intelligence than begin to define the discipline. What does the word one mean? The first word in the sentence. One can more readily talk. One is impersonal. I can say, Jose can more readily talk. I can say, Jose can more readily talk in a definitive and descriptive way about the thought than the discipline. But supposing it's not just Jose, it's everybody. I could say, everybody can more readily talk. Or I could say, you and I can more readily talk. But if I simply want to be general and say, any person, one person, somebody, the easiest way to put that is one can. It's like a short form of one person. It just means a person. Okay, the next question was, what does readily mean? Readily means easily, easy. Easy. One can more easily talk about this than that. Was that all of the question? Yeah, okay. So, a person can more easily talk in a descriptive and definitive way about the kind of intelligence than begin to define the discipline. There can be no equivalent of Principia Mathematica. There can be no equivalent of Principia Mathematica. Principia Mathematica was a book that was written in the early 20th century, and it tried to remove ambiguity from language. It tried to make language precise and unambiguous so that nobody could misunderstand anything. Each word would have only one meaning. Everything would come to one conclusion. It was within the field of symbolic logic. Levis is not interested in doing this with English. In fact, if he could do it, he would not. He does not consider it a good idea. Language is a vehicle for expressing creative thought, and as such needs to be able to have some ambiguity so that you can take off in this direction with something I say, and another person can take off in this direction, and if we each read a poem, I can have one idea and you will have a different idea, and we share the ideas and grow. That is the living principle. So, there is no equivalent to Principia Mathematica, and we don't want one. Continuing the reading, nevertheless, it is politic to insist on discipline, and necessary to be able to justify the insistence. So important is the kind of intelligence in the present phase of human history, when Lord Robbins, surveying the needs of education at the university level, recognizes that the natural sciences must be complemented by the study of human nature, and brings out the force of this recognition by pointing to psychology and the social sciences. That is a very long sentence. We need to break it up. Let us begin at the beginning. Nevertheless, it is politic to insist on discipline, and necessary to be able to justify the insistence. So important is the kind of intelligence to the present phase of human history. Okay, he is saying, in spite of the fact, by the way, nevertheless means in spite of, it means something different is coming. Something contrary is coming. In the previous sentence, he said, one can more easily, more readily talk about thought than discipline. Nevertheless, even though it is not easy, even though it is hard, we must define the discipline. It is politic. That means it's necessary, politically necessary, practically necessary, to insist on some sort of discipline. which is a training technique, a pedagogical technique. So we must insist on discipline, and we must justify the insistence. To justify the insistence means we must give reasons and prove that we need this discipline. Because in the intellectual climate of today, at this part of human history, if we don't prove that a discipline like this is necessary, nobody will do it. In the schools today and in Levis's day, they were throwing out practical criticism, saying it wasn't important. They were not studying English grammar. They were not teaching literary criticism. They were only exposing students to reading. That's all. So, Levis says we must insist on discipline, and we must justify our insistence. We must prove to the world logically and forcefully with argument that this discipline is necessary. Okay. Nevertheless, it is politic to insist on discipline and necessary to be able to justify the insistence. So important is the kind of intelligence in the present phase of human history. Okay. The reason we need this discipline, the reason we must fight to explain to the world why we need the discipline, justifying it, is because this kind of intelligence is so important. It is crucial. Crucial. C-R-U-C-I-A-L. Crucial means indispensably important. Very important. This intelligence is very important in our present phase of history, and the intelligence is important, but in our present phase of history, nobody is fostering it. The educational system is suppressing, actually killing the development of this. Suppressing. Suppress. The educational establishment in this phase of history today and in Levis's day, which was only 25, 30 years ago, was actually suppressing the development of creative intelligence in students. So, we must justify this discipline because of how important is the kind of intelligence in the present phase of human history. When Lord Robbins, surveying the needs of education at the university level, recognizes that the natural sciences must be complemented by the study of human nature, and brings out the force of this recognition by pointing to psychology and the social sciences. Okay, this portion of the sentence is an example. It is proof that the time of history is very bad, and that the discipline which will foster this intelligence has been lost. Okay, Lord Robbins was, I believe he was actually an economist, but he was an academic in the Cambridge school at the time. And he said that the study of science must be complemented by the study of human nature. So far, so good. We agree that science and human nature both must be studied, and you cannot fully understand science if you don't understand the more human studies. But then Lord Robbins brought out the force of his comment, in other words, clarified his advice by pointing to psychology and the social sciences as our source for information about human nature. That is totally backwards, according to Levis. Levis believes that the study of language, in the case of Levis, the English language, but it doesn't have to be English. It could be any sufficiently broad, subtle language with a good literary base. The study of the literature of a language is the foundation for all other studies, because even science depends on the use of language to communicate its truths. And if you do not have a broad and subtle mastery of language, you will not really understand the principles of physics or even biology and chemistry. And we do not get this information by studying psychology or the social sciences. If we want to understand human nature, and if we want to grow wisdom, we should study literature. Because in studying literature, we see the lives of people. It is better to see the lives of people and to form our own impressions and conclusions about human nature in our own head than to read what psychologists say and simply believe the psychologist. So through the study of literature, we can come to an organic understanding, an understanding that is natural, that comes from within us. We can form that type of understanding of human nature. And also, we can acquire a broad mastery of the language which conveys these truths. And that language can be used to understand science or anything else. So, Lord Robbins was right when he said we cannot only study science, we also must study human nature. But he had no appreciation for literature and language as necessary foundations. So that's what that sentence means. Let us read on. These are disciplines. His concessive gesture toward literature and the arts makes it plain that they are to be regarded as pleasing adjuncts to what really matters, graces and adornments in the margin of life that shouldn't be discouraged. They contribute dignity and amenity. There is a phrase we use in English called damned with faint praise. Lord Robbins is damning with faint praise literature and the arts. This is an irony. He says literature and the arts should not be discouraged. When he says they should not be discouraged, that is very far short of saying we must encourage these. Levis believes that literature and the arts and the language which undergirds them is the foundation, the bedrock of all higher education. It is essential and crucial. And to say that literature and the arts are graces and adornments in the margins of life, graces and adornments in the margin of life, contributing dignity and amenity, this is classic damning with faint praise. What he is saying is, these things are wonderful, beautiful, terrific. If you want, you can have them. But he's not saying they are crucial. He is saying that science and psychology and sociology are, as we put it in English, where it's at. They are science and sociology and psychology are where it's at. Literature and the arts are in the sideline, in the margins, not important. They are damned with faint praise. In fact, Lord Robbins doesn't care about literature and the arts at all. And in our schools in America, when they run out of money, which happens all the time, they cut the arts first. Art has to go. And if they still run out of money, literature, it's not even about money with literature. They just got rid of the teaching of grammar and practical criticism years ago. It's gone. And fine literature is really not taught. Literature is not considered an important study in America. And but the sciences are crucial. They will not ever cut science. So, we shall continue. So that is the meaning of this sentence. Lord Robbins is a guy who wants his students to study human nature via psychology, and literature isn't even on his radar. Okay, next paragraph. If you have any questions, email them. There's one.
Can you explain exactly where it's at means?
Excuse me?
Can you explain exactly what where it's at means?
Oh, where it's at. That's
Can you repeat the question?
yeah. The student wants to know, what does where it's at mean? That is an idiom that is used by kids, but not even kids of today. It was kids of a few years ago. It means, it's hard for me to explain it except by means of other idioms. It means cool, with it, bad, fat, happening, all of these are the same kind of thing. They are colloquial, they are idiomatic, they are street language, and they mean central. And there's a word on the tip of my tongue, I can't think of what it means. They mean central and indispensable and important and these kinds of things. Fashionable might be a good word. Okay? Any other questions? No? All right. So anyway, literature is not where it's at. Literature is not important. Science is where it's at. Science is the happening thing. Science is cool. Science is with it. Science is that. Well, you probably wouldn't use these. These are too ghetto, so forget that. Okay, let's go on. What we have to get essential recognition for is, by the way, I'm on the second paragraph on the second page, page 20. What we have to get essential recognition for is that major creative writers are concerned with a necessary kind of thought. Okay. What we have to get essential recognition for is that major creative writers are concerned with a necessary kind of thought. Okay, let us consider that sentence because it's a key sentence. Okay. What we have to get essential recognition for. This is back to the idea of justifying our insistence. We need to get the world, or at least the academic world, to agree with us. Okay, that's what essential recognition means. We need to get them to agree that major creative writers are dealing with a necessary kind of thought. This idea of a necessary kind of thought is a key concept in this book. It is a theme, a necessary kind of thought. This is tied to the living principle. The living principle is this necessary kind of thought. Without this kind of thought, humanity is no better than a low, almost like an animal. One of the things that makes a human being higher than the animals is this kind of creative thought, according to Levis. And the major creative writers, the people who are writing good literature, today and in the past, classic literature, those writers were dealing in the kind of thought which makes the human race progress, without which we are hardly human. We must get the world, the academic world, to see the importance, the crucial importance of fostering this kind of thought. Maybe they don't know it exists. We need to make them see it and make them understand that it is contained in literature. Major creative writers are putting forth this kind of thought. Okay? What we have to get essential recognition for is that major creative writers are concerned with a necessary kind of thought. To such recognition, the climate of our age is hostile. In other words, the world, the academic world, does not recognize that there is a necessary kind of thought that makes human beings human. They do not recognize it, and they do not want to recognize it. They are hostile. They are against this idea. They would not like this idea. To such recognition, the climate of our age is hostile. The hostility being a measure of the importance that is denied. Okay. The hostility is great. It is great commensurate with the importance that they are denying. So, the importance of this intelligence is very high. High level of importance. Their hostility is equally high. Their hostility is measured by the importance that they are denying. If this were not important, they would not care. They care to the measure of importance that they are denying. Let us continue. Where the hostility prevails, thought is disabled for the performance of an indispensable function, the central one. Okay. Prevails means succeed. In a war or a combat where two armies clash, the one that prevails is the one that wins the battle. Prevail means to win. So, where this hostility wins the battle, thought is disabled. People cannot think. If you live in a society where hostility to intelligence prevails, the society will be unable to think properly. It says, thought is disabled for the performance of an indispensable function, the central one. So, it's not that they can't think at all. It's that they can't do a specific kind of thinking. The central, important kind of thinking, which makes us fully human. The kind of thinking that adds to the stock of wisdom of humanity. For example, if Brazil had no hostility to creative intelligence and to truth, then Brazil would raise up leaders and philosophers and wise men who would add to the store of human knowledge. And people all over the world would read their words and learn and add to them still. And then other societies could benefit from the creative wisdom of the Brazilian philosophers and poets and novelists and politicians. Because the central purpose of thought would be functioning properly in Brazil. However, if hostility to learning and hostility to wisdom, hostility to truth prevails, thought is disabled, and there are no philosophers, no wise politicians, no brilliant educators in the country, because hostility has prevailed. That's what that sentence means. All right, let's see. Continuing. The slighted truths are implicit in my insistence that English should represent, and be recognized to represent, a discipline sui generis, a discipline of intelligence. Okay. The slighted truths are basically that English must be taught as a discipline. Literature must be taught as a discipline. A discipline sui generis means a discipline without peer, in a category of its own. English should represent and be recognized to represent a discipline sui generis, a discipline of intelligence. He is saying that English, the teaching of language, is primary and foundational. It is in a category all by itself, and it is prerequisite to higher intelligence. So if you want the intelligence, you must start out with the study of language, literary language of a broad, rich, subtle kind. There will be no neat and final account of the distinctive discipline, but the need and the challenge to define and redefine will always be there. Okay.
Margarita,
yes.
A question about the previous sentence, right?
Mm-hmm.
The very beginning of the sentence, the slighted truths are implicit in my insistence. What does slighted mean in this sentence?
The question is, in the phrase, the slighted truths are implicit in my insistence, what does the word slighted mean? When you slight something, you sort of push it to the margins. You exit out. In this case, the slighted truths are basically the study of English and literary criticism as an academic discipline in itself. Even the idea that we should teach it has been slighted. It's like overlooking. Lord Robbins didn't even think of literary criticism as a good way to learn about human nature. He slighted that vehicle. He overlooked it. So slighted means to exit out, to overlook it, to not pay attention to it. Okay. Okay, there will be no neat and final account of the distinctive discipline, but the need and the challenge to define and redefine will always be there. Okay. Keep in mind, when he uses the word discipline, he is talking about a teaching technique. A pedagogical approach. So, discipline means a teaching technique, a pedagogical approach. So he says, there will be no neat and final account of the distinctive discipline, but the need and the challenge to define and redefine will always be there. Okay, the need is the need of young people, students, perpetually, always, students will need to be fostered in intelligence. So the need will always be there. The need to foster intelligence in the young. But the practical detail of how to do it will never be neat and easy.
2 words. A question about 2 words. Need and account.
Account. Neat and final account. Okay. All right. The question is, what does the word neat mean and what is the final account? Okay. Suppose you are trying to write a curriculum, write a lesson plan, a plan for all the schools in Brazil. They will have to follow your plan to teach English to students in Brazil. So, if you make a plan that is neat, it will be very orderly, very specific. It will have first this, then this, then this. We spend 10 minutes on vocabulary, 30 minutes on grammar, 1 hour reading aloud, 1/2 hour discussing what we mean, what we read, 1 hour writing a paper. Every class follows this curriculum. It is very neat. Neat means orderly, clean, no ambiguity, no questions. Anybody can do it. Any teacher, young teacher, old teacher, gifted or not gifted, they can follow this plan because it is neat and clean and easy. That's what neat means. And final account means we wrote the book on the curriculum, closed it up, handed it out, and never changed it. It is perfect. It is like mathematics. You write one book on mathematics, and it is enough. You only need 1 Euclid, and you've got geometry. That's it. There isn't anything else. So final account means a method that will always work, that is never needing to be changed because it is complete. He says that's never going to happen. Forget it. No way. No way. This will not happen and cannot happen. The need will always be there because young people will always be being born and growing up and will have new ideas and new questions and a need for new approaches and new information. It's like you cannot feed your son the bread of last year today. You need to bake new bread every day. Every day it must be fresh. So the need for academic and intellectual food will always be there. But there will be no neat and final account of the distinctive discipline. But the need and the challenge to define and redefine will always be there. So, what they're saying is, the need will always be there, always pressing us, always making us continue to work to define and redefine the discipline. We're going to define it the first time. So maybe they'll ask me to write the curriculum, and I'll write it what I just said. 10 minutes of vocabulary, 15 minutes of grammar, half an hour of reading, half an hour of discussion, half an hour of writing. I defined the distinctive discipline. That's going to do it. I'm happy with it. This discipline will foster intelligence in students. So maybe they'll try that for a year or 2 or 3 or 4. And there'll be problems. And the teachers who are teaching will say, this isn't working. We need to, the children aren't learning the vocabulary, or the college students aren't getting it. We need to put the vocabulary into the reading. Okay, we're going to redefine. Okay, we're going to change it up. We're going to put reading first. Then we will talk about vocabulary and grammar from the reading. Then we will discuss and write. Great. So they'll try that for a while. But then, 2 or 3 years later, the feedback will come. The students are frustrated. They want to write more. They don't have enough time for writing, and they don't know how to write. We need to put in something about writing. Okay, well, now we will redefine. So we will begin with a writing lesson. Then we will read, and then etc. So the need will always be there. And the discipline must be defined and redefined over and over forever. Because as soon as you meet one need, you'll go off this way. And then you'll have to redefine and you'll go this way. And then you redefine and you'll go this way. Constantly adjusting, like driving a car. You never just set the steering wheel and go. You are always adjusting a little bit left, a little bit right to stay on the path. That is what this will be. It will never be finally defined. The need will always be there, spurring the teachers on to define and redefine the distinctives of the discipline. Okay? The need and the challenge to define and redefine will always be there. For the problems, decidedly in the plural here, that present themselves in so formidable a way and so inexorably as practical ones, involve tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise so inescapably that the ends, the living principle, that, together with the ahun, I can't say that word, implicit in them, should give the defects their meaning, will be lost if practice is not associated with thought that renews and reformulates. That is a hard sentence. Are there any questions coming through before we start? Okay. This sentence I find very difficult, but let us tackle it. Let me erase first. All right. Okay. Okay. For the problems, decidedly in the plural here, problems are practical problems. They are, how are we going to get this in place in the schools? And when it says decidedly in the plural, he says there are many problems, definitely more than one. Okay? For the problems, decidedly in the plural here, that present themselves, the problems present themselves in so formidable a way and so inexorably as practical ones. Okay, so that means the problems are formidable. That means they're serious and hard to overcome, challenging, difficult problems. And so inexorably as practical. So it's not just theoretically difficult, but even if we get the theoretical part right, there are practical obstacles that are unescapable. Inexorable means inescapable. Okay? These problems involve tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise.
Okay. Can you explain the meaning of tentativeness and compromise?
Okay, tentativeness and compromise. Actually, here we are getting to a part of the sentence that I'm not sure I understand thoroughly. I do know the meaning of the words. I'm not quite sure how he is using them, but I'll explain the meaning of the words. Okay, the problems involve tentativeness. Tentative means someone is not sure. Someone is holding back. They are going forward slowly because they are not sure. They are tentative. They are testing the waters. Okay? So the problems involve tentativeness. We cannot just barrel in and do something as though we knew what we were doing. You cannot be too rough here. You must finesse. You must try something gentle to see if it works. That, I think, is what he means by tentativeness. And I have to say, this problem of tentativeness, the academic authorities, people in the schools, will not like the fact that Levis is tentative. If he is tentative, they will not believe in him. He must be strong in his recommendation, or no one will believe him. However, you cannot do that. He must be tentative as he suggests a course of action. So, the problem involves tentativeness, incompleteness. Remember, I said it will never be fully defined, no final account. Our discipline is always incomplete. It is always changing directions to meet a new need. That is a problem. That is a problem if you are writing a curriculum to be used in the whole country. People don't like that. They want it to be complete. Okay, but no. It involves tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise. Compromise means if I want this and you want this, maybe we can agree in this. So with compromise, two parties that want something different, each one gives a little so they can agree. So in this case, the discipline involves compromise. We must, for example, allow the student to think creatively and have his own ideas. And yet, on the other hand, we must teach the student what is a sound, correct, logical idea. So we must compromise between fostering creativity and teaching correct knowledge. That might be an example of compromise. We also might have to compromise between allowing students to use the language creatively versus teaching them correct, dogmatic rules of English grammar. You can't use a word that way. It's wrong. But we want you to be creative and use words in new ways. That is compromise. There's a need for compromise because you have irreconcilable interests. Okay, so the problems in the plural are practical and involve tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise. So inescapably, that means you can't get away from it, that the ends, the living principle, that together with the Ahnung, I can't say that word, it's German, Ahnung, implicit in them, should give the defects their meaning, will be lost if practice is not associated with thought that renews and reformulates. This sentence construction is very difficult for me. All right, let's see. I'm going to try to take out this phrase and put in, I'm going to reread it without the parentheses and without the clause, which begins with together with. Let us try this sentence again. The problems involve tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise, so inescapably that the ends that should give the defects their meaning, okay, the ends that should give the defects their meaning will be lost if practice is not associated with thought. Okay, I'm going to write this down. The ends that should give the defects their meaning would be lost if, let's see, if practice is not associated with thought that renews and reformulates. If practice that is associated with thought, is associated with thought, right? If practice is not associated with thought, if practice is not associated with thought, okay, practice is not associated, I'm going to abbreviate that, with thought, that reformulates. That reformulates, right? And renews. Okay, this is much easier and clearer. And I'll tell you where the other things are. Ends, and this is the living principle. And then we have something else in here. Together with. I don't know how to spell it. Whatever that word is. Ahnung. Oh, this is wrong. Okay, this sentence is so hard for me. Okay, here we go. These problems, which we've been speaking of, all right, that present themselves in so formidable a way and so inexorably as practical ones, involve tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise so inescapably that the ends that should give the defects their meaning would be lost if practice is not associated with thought that reformulates, renews. Okay. The problems the problems involve tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise so inescapably. Okay, these tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise are the things which the academic authorities won't like. Okay, they're terrible problems. It will be hard to put together a discipline because tentativeness, incompleteness, and compromise are inherent in the system. And because of this, the ends that should give the defects their meaning, the end is that the student will grow in creative intelligence. Everything is for that end, the living principle, that the student's mind will flourish, his soul will flourish, he will grow and become creative, and his mind will be able to think correctly and wisely. This end that should give the defects their meaning. Remember when I said compromise? We want the student to write creatively, but we also must teach him the rules. Okay? The compromise, when we let him write creatively and do it wrong, that's a defect. But the end is that he will grow in intelligence. So if he grows, the compromise was worth it. And again, with tentativeness, we are going to try this and try that, and we're not too sure. That is a defect. It would be better if we knew what we were doing and could go in and say, this is it. Do it this way. That is strong. That is not a defect. But we must be tentative. That's a defect. However, if the student grows, then the defect has meaning. And so we had the tentativeness, the compromise, and incompleteness. The fact that we cannot close the book and give it to people because we're always reformulating. That is a defect in our discipline. However, if the end of the living principle is served, then the defect has meaning. Okay? So, we have these terrible defects, and they're so bad that the end of the living principle would be lost if the practice, the discipline, the teaching approach is not associated with thought that reformulates and renews. Okay, so what they're saying, this is really a sentence which reinforces the idea that we must be always defining and redefining the discipline. We will never close the book and say this is how to do it, because it is so difficult to achieve this end, and our means of teaching are so inadequate and so defective and incomplete that we would never succeed in achieving these ends unless the teachers themselves are capable of thought which reformulates and renews. So the living principle is that we are going to grow students with intelligence which is creative and correct. And our means of doing this, our practical discipline, must be also alive. It must be practiced by people who are themselves mature and capable of thought, of creative thought. And they themselves must be continually setting their eyes on the prize. They are continually looking to the end and then finding a way to achieve it, a new way, reformulating the path as they go. The teachers must do this, or else the ends that should give the defects their meaning will be lost if they don't. Okay? Yes.
We should take a 10-minute break.
Okay, time for a break. And then we come back with questions. Okay, very good. We're back. And the whole time I've been getting questions. And I had to call some of my friends to get the answers. So these are hard questions. Okay, first question. One student asked, what does damned with faint praise mean? And let me give it to you again. Okay, this is a device, like sarcasm, sort of like sarcasm, sort of like irony. Damned means condemn. Or criticize. If you are criticizing something, usually you will say something bad about it. Like if someone makes a new dress and asks if you like it, if you want to condemn it or criticize it, you will say, oh, I don't like it. It is ugly. It has a bad color. Its neck is too low. Its skirt is too high. The sleeves are funny. You will say something bad if you are trying to criticize. But if you are too polite and you are nice, you want to criticize, but you want to be nice, then you could use the device of damning with faint praise. For example, if they say, how do you like my dress? You can say, oh, that is interesting. Or you can say, oh, my grandmother would like that dress, if it's for old people or something. So you say something positive, but not very positive. Only faintly positive, a little bit positive. And by that, the person knows that you really mean something negative. Okay? Another question. What is the difference between readily and easily? Readily and easily. Readily has to do with convenience. Easily has to do with skill. They are very close, but their connotation is a little bit different. For example, maybe I want to bake a cake which is hard to make, okay? Something that requires skill, okay? I might say, I can easily bake a cake. I can easily bake the cake because I know how. It is hard to do, but I can do it easily because I have skill. So I can easily bake the cake, but I cannot readily do it if I have no flour. I can't do it readily because I have to go to the store and get flour. I don't have any. I could do it easily, but I can't do it readily. If I have all of the ingredients handy, I can readily make the cake because everything is here. I can readily make the cake. You could say, I can readily bake the cake if I have the recipe, but it won't be easy if I don't have skill. But I'll readily do it because I have everything I need. Okay? So readily and easily. All right, next one. Let's see. Someone wants to know more about homeschooling in the next class. I'll save that for next time. And if you want to ask a specific question, that would be good. Someone has asked about methods. Okay. This is the question. I have a question about the meaning of English as in the sentence, English as an instrument of thought. If I was to translate this sentence, should it be inglés or literatura or lingua? I think it means English as an instrument of thought. What it means is literary language. Literary language. And it not only means literary language, it means a mastery of a subtle got that one wrong. TLE. Subtle and rich literary language. As an instrument of thought. It means that if you have a mastery of a subtle and rich form of a literary language, that will be a tool your mind will use to organize sophisticated thought.
So maybe in Portuguese it would be linguagem instead of língua.
How do you spell that word?
Linguagem.
Linguagem.
For instance, if you use the word inglês, in Portuguese, inglês means the study of the English language.
Right.
Right?
Inglês means the study of the English language.
If you use literature, you're studying English literature.
Right.
Or something like that.
Yeah, and literature is English literature.
And language is more like...
Whereas linguagem is more broad. So it doesn't have to be English. It's mastery of a subtle and rich literary language. And he uses the word English because he's at Cambridge. Okay. All right, let's see. Readily and easily. Wow. Here is a very long one. I wonder if I should defer it or should I read it out loud? This long question or comment. I haven't read. All right, I will read something that a student has written. It's kind of long and I haven't read it yet. So I don't know if it's a question or only a comment, but I'll read it to you. Linguistically speaking, there are some particularly interesting expressions Levis employs in his opening paragraph. And they are interesting for different reasons. The first one is to give grounds for our judgment. Give grounds for our judgment. Oh yeah. Yeah, wait a second. That was in the first paragraph where he says, practical criticism is criticism in practice, and we are engaged in it when, for instance, we decide that a novel is good, give grounds for our judgment. Okay? The image such an expression suggests is fascinating, given the implication of the word ground. To me, it's always interesting to explore the usage and the various meanings of words like that. For example, ground can mean land, bottom, soil, but also reason, cause, argument, or foundation. This fascinates me because of the analogies the words suggest. If we want to build something, it is highly recommendable that we build it on solid ground, firm land. Likewise, if we do judge something, it is advisable we should have grounds for our opinion. So we can say, she is suing the company on grounds of unfair dismissal. Do you have grounds for suspecting it? We have grounds to believe you are lying to us. He refused to answer on grounds that she was unfairly dismissed. There is also the expression to be grounded in something, as in fiction should be grounded in reality. Most phobias are grounded in childhood experience. Lots of uses of the word grounds. Takes a lot of study to get them all. Another interesting expression is to put the case with care. My first reaction is to ask, what kind of image does this expression suggest? Does the verb to put here have a special meaning? Yes, actually it does. Does it mean to express, as in how should I put it? I think that's kind of what it means. And why the word case? Is this expression derived from legal parlance? If it is so, when we use this expression, do we suggest to the reader the image of a lawyer making his argument in a courtroom before a judge and jury? If this is so, isn't it curious that Levis puts this expression together with others like grounds for judgment, inquire into the justice of Eliot's conclusion in the same sentence? Is the same legal flavor present in such expressions as there's a good case for it or against it, to state or overstate the case, to make a case for something, to make a case out of something. I also find it amazing and funny the way Levis uses language when explaining the implications of practical criticism that he didn't like. There seems to be a thread of meaning tying practical, gymnastic, skill, in that this word suggests practical and even physical ability. I can almost see a group of students working out at some literary gym. Those are good comments. Okay, next question. Let's see. I haven't read these questions yet. The ends that should give the effects their meaning. Right. In the last sentence that we studied in the class, there was the phrase, the ends that should give the defects their meaning. And he asks I try to clarify that one more time. We said, all right, let me erase. We have defects in our pedagogical approach. Tentativeness, compromise, incompleteness. These defects are necessary and inherent in our discipline because we are fostering growth of an organic ability. We cannot force someone to grow. The end is the goal. The goal is growth of creative intelligence. Because we are trying to get the creative intelligence to grow, we have to do it this way. The end gives the defects their meaning. The end is what we're trying to get. The approach will enable us to get it. So the defects, we build these defects into the system so that we can get this end. But the end will be lost. We will not get this end. We will lose it if the teachers do not redefine and reformulate and renew their thinking. So if the teachers do not have creative intelligence themselves, then we will lose the ends. And the ends were why we did this in the first place. So I hope that helps. I think that is how what the ends that give the defects their meaning will be lost if we don't have teachers who redefine and reformulate. Okay? Okay, doesn't thought in the last sentence refer to the thought of students instead of instructors? No, I don't think so. The question is, doesn't thought in the last sentence refer to thought of students? I don't think so, but let me check it again. Okay. Incompleteness and compromise so inescapably that the ends that should give the defects their meaning will be lost if practice is not associated with thought. No, it's the teachers. Practice if practice is not associated with thought. Practice is what the teachers do, and they must associate their practice with thought, which reformulates and renews. So it is not the thought of the students here. It is the thought of the teachers and the educators. All right. Okay, here we have another one. Yeah, no, you can't do that. All right, this is it. If in the sentence should give the defects their meaning will be lost, I take out should give the defects and produce only their meaning will be lost. You cannot do that. That's not correct. Yeah. The ends that should give the defects their meaning. The ends that should give the defects their meaning will be lost. Okay. Should give the defects, their meaning will be lost. Yeah, no. No. It's the ends which are going to be lost. The ends that should give the defects their meaning modifies ends. And it means these defects we built into the system in order to achieve certain ends. The defects have no meaning except because we are trying to produce certain outcomes. So this clause modifies ends, and the core sentence is the ends will be lost. The ends will be lost. Students learning how to play music. Okay. We always watch in American movies high school students learning how to play music. What kind of art do you think is more important in education? When Levis says arts, what does he mean? All kinds of art? I believe Levis means all kinds of art. I personally think that all forms of art are equally important. They're all forms of expression. The creative mind puts out artistic expression in one form or another or another or another. Personally, I would not say that music is higher than poetry, or poetry is higher than fiction writing, or fiction writing is higher than representational painting or photography or any of the arts, design. There are all kinds of arts, and I personally believe that the mature, healthy human being will put forth artistic expression, and that it is a byproduct of creativity. And in education, I personally believe that the arts should be studied, and children or students who have talent should develop skill. And those who do not have talent, it is not necessary for them to practice practical art, but they should study to appreciate great art of all kinds, in my opinion. Okay. Okay, we have another one here. Someone wants a explanation of the sentence, but the need and the challenge to define and redefine will always be there. The need is the hunger in young people for intellectual and spiritual food. Young people are growing. Their minds are developing. They must be fed with good information and experiences. And through literature, they can feed their souls on the experiences of others. The need will always be there, just like the need for food is always present where you have life. The challenge to define and redefine is more about how we teach and how we meet this need. How will we feed this need? It is a challenge because it is not easy to do. And we must continue to define or figure out what students need today and give it to them. And then tomorrow we will redefine. We'll figure out what do they need tomorrow. Okay, so in terms of how will we grow up the students, we will always be changing our approach, defining and redefining. And they will always be needy. Okay, I think this may be the last question. Is it? This is the last question. Couldn't I say that the central part of the sentence is, if practice is not associated with thought, that renews and reformulates, the ends, that should give the defects their meaning, will be lost. Yes, that is exactly right. I'll read it carefully so those who didn't actually write this can hear it. This is a good rewriting of the sentence. If practice is not associated with thought that renews and reformulates, the ends that should give the defects their meaning will be lost. I'm going to write this up because it's so beautifully done. And I think that will be the end. If practice is not associated with thought, which renews and reformulates, the ends that should give the defects their meaning. Will be lost. This is perfect. A perfect rewriting of that sentence. Notice the core of the sentence is, if practice is not associated with thought, the ends will be lost. Okay, that's it. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much.